In this presentation, I will be discussing many of the myths and truths about dyslexia that I feel the community needs to know and understand. I personally went out and spoke to many dyslexics in our community around me and around all of us, and we spoke about the struggles and differences that we have and the ways we overcome those. And in this presentation, I wish to go over all of what we discussed. First, let's discuss what dyslexia is not. Dyslexia is not an illness. It is not a disease. There is no medical cure or quote-unquote fix for dyslexia. It is simply something you're born with. Dyslexia is not attention deficit disorder or ADHD. It can often be mistaken for this because of the struggles a student or child has in school. The child does not want to learn because learning is hard, so sitting still in a classroom isn't entertaining or really something they are willing to do. Therefore, many people assume that dyslexia either comes hand in hand or is ADHD or attention deficit disorder. Most importantly, dyslexia is not laziness. It's not someone not wanting to do something. It's someone not being fully capable of doing something. But with help and time, they will one day be able and be capable to do it. Simply enough, what dyslexia is a disability. It's something you're born with. You have to grow and learn to adapt around. The simple Webster's definition for dyslexia is a general term for disorders that involves difficulty in learning to read or interpret words, letters, and other symbols, but does not affect general intelligence. That last part is the most important part, and I cannot stress it enough. Dyslexia does not affect an individual's general intelligence. Dyslexia, though we don't know exactly how it works, we know that it's the brain not being effective at deciphering symbols and letters and numbers because it's wired differently. There's no cure for it. There's no fix, no way to take a pill and it disappear. So instead, you must learn to grow and adapt with dyslexia. Learn ways to get around dyslexia. Each individual will have a unique experience with dyslexia because there are varying degrees and different problems that each individual will face. Someone with a mild case of dyslexia will have trouble with reading and spelling, but it will not be noticed as much by the individual or those around them. Someone with severe dyslexia will have more problems that are prominent to those around them and themselves. Some will have more problems reading than writing, and vice versa. The severities of one person's troubles will not be the same as someone else's. Each experience will be unique because of the neurological makeup within them, along with their outside support system. A support system is made up of those around them, their family, their friends, teachers, anyone that they as an individual can trust. Now, children who are encouraged to read and write and spell will more likely grow up to adapt and develop better coping skills, which can in turn lead to having a more successful time as an adult getting around their dyslexia. Everyone knows about the struggles dyslexia gives students and children in the classroom, but not many people realize dyslexia also affects your everyday life. Stress, for example, affects everyone. When you're in the moment and something's got you all high-strung, you can't concentrate on the task at hand. But for dyslexics, it's another added layer. You're sitting in a room, be it a classroom, your own home, the library, who knows, and you're trying to write or read a phrase, and you just can't get it. You're tripping on a word, or you're tripping on a few sentences, and it gets you frustrated and then stressed. But the more stressed and frustrated you become, the worse and worse it gets. The more you're unlikely to succeed. You have to just stop and take a breath. Remind someone around you that has dyslexia to stop for a while, take a break. Or remember that you're going to struggle and it's okay to struggle. And that taking a break does not mean you're defeated. It just means you need time. Road signs are another issue. Everyone's been there. You're driving in a new town or around your own town, and you don't know where exactly you're going, so you have to read road signs to know you have to connect to this street, off Main Street, or something of that sort. But now put yourself in a position where you can't read those road signs. That's how dyslexics are. They go by too quickly for you to be able to sit there and figure out what sign's which. That's why many dyslexics use landmarks. They go, oh, so-and-so lives past the Walmart and past the McDonald's, so I have to drive past both of those buildings and turn right on the 4th Street. They don't memorize the signs because they're too hard to read in the instant you have. Labels can also be a difficulty. Everyone's done it at least once where you accidentally buy dill weed instead of dill seed. And now your recipe's not going to taste exactly the same. But for a dyslexic, this can happen more than once, more than twice, even more than 3 times in one shopping trip. And that's just because our brains can skip over a letter or switch those around or see something that's not even there. Many dyslexics can also be directionally challenged. That means they'll struggle with remembering their left from right. It can be as simple as you're taking someone home and they say, please turn right down this street. And when you turn right, they go, no, wait, your other right. Well, that's your left, sweetie. It happens. Mistakes happen to everyone. Don't get frustrated with yourself if you do it, or with the dyslexic in your life. They need positive reinforcement. Memorization is key to a dyslexic's life. Instead of having to read signs or asking people where something is, most dyslexics will memorize a store. If they absolutely have to, they'll ask an employee or wander around until they find what they need most of the time. Along with memorization, we have names. Names are very hard to read because sometimes they can look one way but be another. Instead, dyslexics often ask people to repeat their names constantly. I'm sorry, what's your name? Can you say it again? One more time. It's not that they don't remember your name, not all the time, but it's that they're worried they'll mispronounce it. Libraries and bookstores are often scary places for dyslexics as well. You're overwhelmed by the sight of reading a book, so imagine how it would feel being surrounded by them. Surrounded by all these images and words, symbols you can't read or understand. It would be overwhelming to anyone. Many dyslexics, due to this, avoid libraries and bookstores. You have some few, though, who enjoy them, who will go in and be excited about being there. But not everyone is like that, because everyone is different. Cookbooks and recipes can be hard. One little letter separates a teaspoon from a tablespoon. A few different letters separate each different measuring, cup, size, quart. If you forget a letter when you're reading or skip over one, you're going to mess up your recipe. So dyslexics just have to learn to think outside the box. Ask those around them that they trust and know their little circle of trust that they understand they can be safe within. In the classroom, there are many challenges a dyslexic must face. Most of them involve, well, English classes. But history, science, and math also do come into play. Things like popcorn reading, that's where in a classroom where someone's reading a passage and they shout out the name of their friend that they want to read the next paragraph or the next line. It can be really disheartening for a dyslexic because you feel pressured to try to read as fast as everyone else, but you can't, and it's embarrassing. Sometimes you'll stumble on a word that you know that word, but you can't figure it out. Again, embarrassing. Assigned readings, you have no motivation to read on a normal day. Why are you going to want to read something written by a guy hundreds of years ago? There's no motivation there. No motivation to sit at a dining room table or sit in a library and struggle to read something. Timed reading for like math and science classes where you have 30 seconds to read a problem on the computer and then answer it. Most dyslexics don't like those either. Our schools nowadays use things like Kahoot and Khan Academy and Fast Math to help get our math skills up to speed. But you have 30 seconds to read a question and answer the problem. When you're reading the question, before you can even finish, the time's up. Dyslexics fall behind because they can't answer the question. Not because they don't know how to do it, but because they're just not quick enough. Reading assignments and writing assignments, it's pretty obvious where that struggle is. It's in the reading and the writing. There's so much that you have to do, and you're going to spell things wrong, and you're going to read incorrect words, and you just have to come to terms with that's how it is, and it's okay. Note-taking can be hard, especially when teachers write in beautiful cursive for some. I struggle with cursive personally. As a dyslexic, it's quite hard to read. There are other dyslexics that can read it just fine. But trying to read it on the board as the teacher hurriedly writes it down, sometimes you just can't keep up, and you'll fall behind. And that's when we have to remember we live in a world of wondrous technology. Take a picture of the board or someone else's notes, someone that you trust. You don't have to stand against this alone. You're allowed to ask for help. Testing can be difficult, especially when it's the timed tests like the STAR testing or reading assessments. The reading assessments you often would take in elementary school, where they'd sit you outside with you and only a teacher in front of you, and they'd hand you a little book, and they'd say, "Please read this aloud to me, and I will grade you based on what I see or what I hear." And every time you would mispronounce a word or misread a word, they would mark it down. And every time you slowed down, they'd mark it down too, and then they'd time you the entire time to see what it took you to finish this passage. You were sitting outside being judged by your teacher, and it was embarrassing. Because when you'd finish, they'd say, "Well, you're a 5th grader who reads on a 2nd grade level." Or you're a 2nd grader who reads like a kindergartner. And you could sit there and look at them and go, "I could have told you that." Because you know you struggle. But to have someone sit there and judge you, it makes it all the more real and all the more worse. STAR testing, it used to be that you had all day to take your TAKS test, your STAR test, your Texas assessment of academics. You used to have all day. And as someone who didn't have 504 accommodations, one that allowed me to have the test read to me, I had to read the test myself. And it's quite scary thinking about all these words you have to read and hoping you get something right. But when they cut down the testing time down to 4 hours, you bet every dyslexic I knew was scared. Especially those of us who didn't have someone who could help us read or help us spell. When you're stuck in these situations, you need to breathe. And just know that everything will be okay. As I stated earlier, Every dyslexic is different because of how they were raised and their chemical makeup and what makes them themselves. My experience is different from everyone else's because I had a unique way of being raised. I was raised not to be ashamed of my dyslexia. That's a problem many dyslexics struggle with. They're ashamed of what they are. But it's nothing to be ashamed about. You're born the way you are, and you can't change that. I developed a love for reading, and that's because my mother, she would read to me from the day I was born, and even does now. I'm a junior in high school, and my mother still reads to me almost every night. Now, it's no longer fairy tales or storybooks of great adventures. Now it's more my AP statistics textbook. But my mother still reads to me to help me grow as an individual. And this willingness to help me made me an avid reader and an avid lover of stories. Audiobooks are the greatest untapped resource for dyslexics. Type in a book in audible.com or in your local library search for an audiobook. Most likely, if they don't have it, there's at least one that's been made. You can still have the wondrous thrill of a book without having to physically read it, or you can read along with the audiobook. You need to also remember that to develop a love for reading, you have to read what interests you. What interests me slowly got me working up from small, thin fairy tales and Amelia Belia books up to large novels of Harry Potter and all sorts of wonderful stories that I cannot imagine my life without knowing. Now, the next phrase here is called walking dictionary, and that's a loving term I have coined for my mother, who is the mother of 2 dyslexic children and the wife of a dyslexic husband. She tells us how to spell things and reads stuff for us all the time, but a walking dictionary doesn't have to be a human being. It can be a loved one, it could be a friend, family member, but it can also be technology. We have these wonderful phones in our pockets that we carry around with us all the time that we forget can do so much more than just text and make Facebook status updates. MTA is a program here in the LISD that helps dyslexics prepare for higher education in high school and middle school, helping them with reading and writing techniques to hopefully get them on track to be like their peers. The program is meant to help you find strategies to help you get around your disability, finding certain ways to look at words, like the shapes of words. Shapes isn't unusual. Well, shape. It has a giant S in the front, and when you follow the bottom of the word, it has one little dip where the P is. And that's kind of how they would remind you to memorize the shapes of words, to keep you where you can read them. Now, while I personally didn't find this helpful, I know some people who did. And they teach you so many strategies because not everyone uses the same ones. But it all comes down to the same thing. Support. You need support from your friends, your family, your teachers. The greatest teachers in my life were the ones that helped me grow to be who I was. The ones that were willing to work around my disability. The ones that knew, you can't read as quickly, so I shouldn't give you the fast math. Instead, I'm going to give you a worksheet. Or the teachers that knew not to call on me when I read aloud, but to help work with me later on and ask, did you understand what was going on? Did you catch those words? They were a little hard. Another thing to keep in mind is stress. For everyone, stress is an issue, but for me, I saw stress as an unbearable, unpassable wall. Because the more stressed and emotional I got, the harder reading and writing becomes for me. I don't know if this is for everyone, but a lot of dyslexics I know have this issue. It's one that we have to overcome on our own. There are ways to help dyslexics, be it someone you know or yourself. One thing that I've already stated is we live in a wonderful world of technology. Use it to your advantage. There's things out there like Dragon Dictation, which is a wonderful app I use on my iPad that writes whatever you say. You can, instead of sitting there struggling to type your paper, speak your paper. Things like Google Speak, Cortana, Siri. Siri, Cortana, they don't judge you when you ask a question. Siri, define and insert the word you don't know how to spell. Siri will type it out on Google and give you the definition. And she'll read it aloud, just to make sure you're pronouncing it correctly. Things like Smart Home, Echo, Alexa, I think Google has one, that will define a word, and I bet you, spell it to you too. Technology won't judge you, so it's okay to use it, especially if you're nervous about asking someone you know. We have social networking sites because everyone wants to be helpful. Everyone wants to be an entertainer. Things like YouTube, used for wonderful things, but other than funny cat videos, people will put how-tos on the internet. So instead of going home and trying to read an instruction manual that has words in it you don't really understand, Google it, YouTube it. There will be tutorials for everything from assembly to instructions on how to use products to how to fix something you might have broken. When you're in school, take pictures of the whiteboard with the iPad that a lot of schools have been giving you. And if you don't have a school that gives you an iPad, ask to take a picture with your cell phone. Say it will help you get your notes correct and you want to make sure and double check them later. Now when it comes to being lost when driving and not able to read signs, Google Maps or Garmin GPS, they vocalize instructions to you and read the signs. Turn right up ahead in 0.3 miles on, and this will be the street. And now if you can keep track of 0.3 miles, you're set. But they also have landmarks on the maps. Last but not least, it may not be technology, but it's still a way to help. Ask a dyslexic, do you need help reading something? Or if you're a dyslexic, ask for help. Ask for something to be read to you. Ask for someone to spell to you. The biggest help in my life, especially in my English classes, is a boy that probably doesn't even know I use him to read. He sits with me every year, from middle school all the way up through high school. And I turn to him every single day. Hey buddy, can you read this? What does this word say? How do you spell? And he does it, because he understands that I'm dyslexic and need a lot of help sometimes. As someone who's had to grow up dyslexic, going to school, getting through life, and who has lived with a full-grown dyslexic and having to hear stories about them going through life as well, some tips and advice I have to give are pretty simple. For starters, talk to your teachers. Tell them that you struggle, because they don't know. They don't know how it affects you personally as an individual. So let them know. Tell them, well, I'm not too good at reading, or I'm not too good at writing, or spelling will be difficult. They can't fault you for being yourself. If your school gives accommodations, something like 504 accommodations or what the LISD use, these accommodations allow you to have help with reading and writing and extended time for doing work. Fight to keep them, because the school district doesn't want you to keep them. The real world doesn't have accommodations to help you, but these accommodations will help you get through school. Fight to keep them. Don't be ashamed either. Don't be ashamed to tell people that you're dyslexic. There's nothing to be ashamed about. You were born the way you are. There's nothing you can change about that, and there's no one out there who can fault you for being yourself. When reading and writing and doing schoolwork, break it all into chunks. Don't focus on, oh my gosh, I have to read 3 chapters. Focus on a page at a time. Get through it little by little. Don't think I have to write 10,000 words for this paper. Focus on just writing. The words will come naturally. Just focus on the small, and the big picture will end up coming together. Reading is always going to be a struggle, even when you're an adult. Not everyone can get better with age. Some are lucky enough to get better, others aren't. But instead of avoiding reading altogether, find things you want to read. Find books, audiobooks, things that interest you. Video games. The biggest video game I've ever heard of having a lot of reading that making kids want to read, something like Pokemon, where you have to read the directions to figure out where you're going. Or a game where you have to read the responses, like Fallout or Borderlands. Something that interests you. Cookbooks, video games, books, audiobooks, comic books, manga, anything that gets you reading, use. It doesn't have to be stereotypical, quote-unquote, normal literature. It can be anything. Along the lines of tips and advice, I say develop good habits. If you have a test coming up or something important you need to learn in school or something important happening in your daily life, get good amounts of sleep. Don't procrastinate on homework. That just adds another level of stress to where it's not going to get done to the level it should. Practice reading, practice writing. Give your time to double check your test work, your homework, anything like that. And use strategies that help you. And use the people around you, your support system. They're the greatest asset you're going to have. So as we end this presentation, I want to leave you with something very important. You are not alone. If you are dyslexic or someone you know is dyslexic, you're not the only dyslexic in the world. There are plenty of people with dyslexia. 1 in 10 people have it. It's so common, yet not many people know a lot about it. People like Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, and Tom Cruise are just a few to name. Steve Jobs, one of the most brilliant inventors of our time. Albert Einstein, one of the world's brightest minds. Actors and actresses that have to memorize lines all the time, have to read scripts and find ways around it. You're not alone. And dyslexia does not make you any less of a person. Not in any way. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you have gained some information or knowledge.